Hey, I'm Sam and today I'm going to be making a whole bunch of Jumpman jewellery. I need to go get some supplies, so keep watching to see what I end up making.
Hey, it's me again and I'm here to do a voiceover. This project was super long and I wanted to make the video as short as possible, so between speeding clips up and cutting stuff out, hopefully this voiceover provides more of an explanation to what I'm doing. After multiple trips to different stores, I ended up getting almost everything I needed for this project, including crafting chain, jewellery wire, jump rings, clasps, ring and earring bases, beads, embroidery thread, clay and paint. So I started measuring around my wrists and my ankles and I cut the chain to length and I added the jump rings and clasps. I did this all at the start so I can get familiar with the tools and kind of get a vibe of where I wanted the pieces to go, and then I did the same thing to make all the necklaces. Once all the chains were ready, I organised them and put them aside, and then it was time to start making the pendants. I wanted to make my own durable plastic Jumpman charms, so I used this shrink art kit and sanded off the design and then cut the Jumpmans as a test to see how well they would shrink down and what the colours would look like. I really liked how they turned out, so I ended up buying the proper shrink plastic material. This was my first test and I loved how they turned out, so I went ahead and cut more sizes and different designs, including this little outline, which ended up being one of my favourites. Even though I had adjusted the software settings for my cutter, it still didn't cut all the way through the plastic, so I ended up having to peel them all the way from the plastic and cutting some of the edges. These ones are super delicate and we did have some casualties, but it was fun in the end. Here are all the full-size cutouts before I put them into the oven, and then when I took them out, as you can see, one or two of them broke, but they were still quite warm and malleable, so I was able to push them back into shape. Here they all are, fresh out of the oven, and they're already looking so promising. This is such a good alternative to getting shapes cut out of Perspex, and I think they feel quite similar. Before we start making the other pendants, I just want to show you two ideas that I did end up using. One of them was cutting up an aluminium can to make little cookie cutters for the clay. I didn't end up using this because the aluminium strips wouldn't bend around the intricate outline of the Jumpman. And the other one was to make a little wire outline of the Jumpman shape so I can fill it in with some metal compound and make something kind of like an enamel pin. I tried to fill the shape with solder due to its low melting point, but it just clumped up around the edges instead of making a little pull, so I scrapped the idea. Even though both of these didn't work out, they were such cool concepts and I still wanted to include these in the video. For this pendant, I wanted to stick on a whole bunch of little jewels, but the super glue I used made them look really cloudy. I tried to wipe off the excess with acetone and put an all-purpose sealer on top, but it was still super cloudy. I ended up finding this gemstone glue, so I tried it again using this, and it worked out so well. You can tell the difference side by side. This is so much shinier. Since the clay cutter I tried to make didn't work out, I tried to cut some Jumpmans, but they just didn't look as good in comparison to the shrink plastics. I then played around with making different shaped charms, and I even incorporated some silver leaf to match the chains I used to make the bracelets. I found these letter stamps for cake decorating and I used them to spell out Air Jordan to make little bar pendants. Once I was done with all the clay pendants and charms, I poked holes in them so I can attach jump rings to them when they're dry. And here are all the clay cutouts just before they got baked in the oven. Now that I've made everything, it was time to get them ready to go onto the jewellery. For the shrink plastic Jumpmans, I had to make little holes in them for the jump rings to go through. I painted some of the shrink plastics with red enamel paint. I also mixed my own paint to colour some of the pendants to match the rose gold chains they were going onto. I made these little stencils so I can put Jumpmans on some of the smaller clay charms. When I peeled off the stencils, some of the paint came along with them, so I had to try and freehand some of the missing parts. I also did a bit of hand lettering on some of the smaller charms. I couldn't find black enamel paint anywhere, so I substituted it with nail polish. And then I used black acrylic paint for any details on the clay charms. Once all the charms and pendants were finished, I used an all-purpose sealer for anything I wanted to keep shiny and matte Mod Podge for anything that I wanted to keep flat. Now that everything's dry, it's time to assemble all the pieces. I started with the earrings, and since the bases protruded from the Jumpman too much, I decided to cut them down. I used the pliers to cut the base and bended them back and forth until they snapped off. I then used super glue to stick the back of the base onto the earring and held it in place to dry. I did do this bit before I painted it, but it just made sense to put all the assemblies together. With the ring, I had coated the base with black nail polish, but I scratched a bit of that off so when I stuck the Jumpman down, it would adhere to the actual ring base rather than just the paint. I wanted to make this friendship bracelet just to add a little bit more colour. Making this one took a little longer because it's basically a million knots, but here's a little bit of that footage. Then it was time to attach the charms and pendants onto the rest of the bracelets and anklets. That first one was definitely one of my favourites to make, but here's some footage of the rest. I ended up having to resize a couple of the bracelets to account for some of the smaller or bigger charms. I'm really into this beaded bracelet aesthetic, so I wanted to incorporate it into this video somehow. I saw these letter beads at the shops and I really wanted to include them, so I'm glad I was able to use it for this bracelet. I measured everything out so it was nice and symmetrical, and then when I was done, I tied the ends together and I sealed them with super glue. I ended up using some black nail polish over the top to try and hide the frosted glue. I played around with the idea of using these same beads on a necklace, and I really liked the contrast it created when I attached them to the chain. I used some wire and bead crimps to make little loops so I can attach the beads to the chain. After I'd finished making that necklace, I found these beads at the store and I couldn't resist getting them to make another necklace. I went and attached a little clay nameplate to the necklace, and it honestly turned out better than I thought it was going to. I found this little locket at the store and I glued a Jumpman to the inside of it and poured in some gemstones to add some movement to the piece.
Here are all the finished pieces. I ended up making a pair of earrings, a ring, 3 anklets, 5 necklaces, and 8 bracelets. I never made jewelry to this extent before and I was definitely out of my comfort zone, but I had so much fun making everything and I really like how they all turned out. But thanks for watching, go subscribe and check out my Instagram, and I'll see you next time.